On the screen, Penny Vossler. To my right, she's waving and has a green shirt on, and Heather Matson on my left. Now in the center, they're going to be talking with us tonight. We're expecting Admiral Mike Franken. When he comes on, we'll stop and introduce him also. I thought I should tell people just a little bit about the Women's Caucus. This is our 5th educational informational session. We have our group meetings for an hour beginning at 8 o'clock on the 3rd Thursday of every month. We try really hard to have topics that will help women find their voice and use their voice to talk with other people, to talk with their elected representatives. So the whole mission is to empower Iowa women to exercise and engage in public discourse, exercise their rights, engage in public discourse, and make their voices heard at all levels of government. If you, there's no membership, there's no initiation, there's no hazing, there's no fee. We just like to have you be interested in women's issues. And women's issues are not just limited to women. We, our issues and our values enable and aid all of Iowa. So we are welcoming any males that wish to join as well. So I think with that further ado, we'll start talking to Penny and Heather. One of the things that we have been doing almost in all of my social circles, and I guess I must be with a lot of Democratic people, is that, you know, what happened during this election? How come we got beaten so badly? The other states in Iowa, other than Iowa, did well or did better. It wasn't the red tsunami that they were expecting. So what went on in Iowa? So what we have done is identified Penny as a rural candidate who was running for House District 48, and Heather, who ran in House District 42, which is the Ankeny area. So we're going to talk with them about what went right. That will be the first question. What could have been done differently or better is the second question. And how can we encourage the Women's Caucus to aid candidates in the future? So Penny, since I got to vote for you, you get to go first and talk about the rural caucus. What went right?
What went right for me was the House Truman Fund. It was amazing, so helpful. A first-time candidate, I had no clue what to do, what I needed to do, how to do any of it, and they got my campaign set up. Everything from threw together a website for me, pulled stuff off the Boone County Democrats website and stuck it on there, and then just showed it to me and said, what do you need? What do you want us to change? They set up my Act Blue. They helped me set up, walked me through setting up a campaign finance account, any kind, the filing paperwork. Daniela even drove up to Boone County and took the photos that I used for my official announcement during work one day. So they were just amazing. So that was one thing that was done right and could not be done better. And I hope that every candidate, I would like to see that expanded to more candidates than just the House Truman Fund. I think every Democrat candidate, if they had that kind of support to get them started, that would be amazing. We had some great training sessions. Jennifer Confirst was one of our main speakers we went in Ankeny, right, Heather? Were you there?
Yes, you were in my district.
Yeah. And that was really helpful as well. Just a day jam-packed with information and cheerleading. It was nice to have cheerleaders. Another thing that I thought went well was I had huge support. I had so many people who were so grateful to see me run. I had people, I would knock on their door and they would take a look at me and say, save your breath and save your paper. I'm voting for you. And okay, thank you. And away I go, So there were some real bright spots in and I learned some things about outreach, but I have quite a bit to talk about when it gets down to what we could do better. We'll let Heather talk now.
All right.
Okay. Heather, before you begin, I should remind people, and I forgot to do that, if they want to make comments or have a question, they need to type it into the chat. So, and I'll be watching the chat to see if any of those items come in. So Heather, what went well for you? What went right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation to be with you guys. I'm incredibly excited to be here. And also, I just want to say, Penny, thank you so much for running. I think you ran a fantastic campaign, and I'm just so grateful that you were willing to do it. So thank you very, very much. And yeah, so I'm representative-elect for House District 42, which is about half of Ankeny. And the things that I felt like went really well, I want to echo what Penny said about the House Truman Fund. They are fantastic and did a really great job with our candidates. And the other thing that is really very local to me, but is something that that I think that every community can work on getting to, knowing that it's going to take a long time to get there, and not to say that these sort of things aren't already being done, but just to do even more, are neighbor-to-neighbor programs. So Ankeny Area Democrats, as an example, this year they launched a neighbor-to-neighbor block captain program. And the essence of it is that, we divide out, every registered Democrat and some no party folks, and it would be like one volunteer would get, a group of people that lived really close to them, essentially. And they would be working on doing outreach specifically to people in their neighborhood that are registered Democrats as well. And, getting them information, doing lit drops, but also door knocking and calls and texts when we had that option available. So that in addition to the work that we were doing as candidates, every registered Democrat was at a bare minimum getting a packet of lit for everyone that we at least had literature for that was on the Democratic ticket. So that information was going out. And then our Ankeny Area Democrats were also doing text banks and, phone calls and some door knocking as well. And then what worked well for me as a candidate is that I'm a very strong believer in the power and importance of persuasion. And it is certainly true that it is absolutely necessary to do that when you live in a district like mine, or so many across the state that are either like mine, which is roughly a third on party registration, or just simply you cannot win just by talking to Democrats. So my focus, in addition to knocking the door of every registered Democrat in my district, I also knocked the doors of a very large number of no party and Republican voters. And my message was the same, no matter who I was talking to. And I think that is kind of a really big piece of what helped me be successful, was that power of just showing up. And I cannot tell you how many people that were in particular registered Republicans, when I showed up at the door and they were like, kind of like, why are you here? I'm not a Democrat. And I'm like, oh, I know that. I'm here because I want to introduce myself, and I'd really like the chance to get to know you. So that is what I would say for me worked really well. And I always look at door knocking as essentially community building. And so if we are willing to think of it as just getting to know our neighbors, it feels a little bit less daunting. And I think it's a way to encourage more people to get involved that way too.
Heather and Penny, a new term for me this campaign was relational organization. Is that the same as what you're describing, Heather, in terms of that working with your neighbors and having a block of people that were dedicated to reaching out to a certain group?
So it's a little bit different, but the idea is, I think, to eventually get to that point. So the concept of relational organizing is basically working with people you already know, right? And who may or may not typically vote, or, maybe you guys don't even normally talk about politics, but their number's in your phone and you already have a relationship with them, right? So it is building upon the relationship you already have and the connection you already have, to get them more engaged. So that's kind of that's kind of the basics of relational organizing. Whereas a neighbor to neighbor program is just continuing to build that community, right? And, if you think about it, when you go out and knock doors, or you're calling somebody, how much more impactful it could be if you say, like, hey, I'm your neighbor. I literally live right down the street, or, we live here in the same town, or something like that, that just shows that just that much more of a connection helps, I think, make it even more of a relationship.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Penny,
We
one
did-
of the, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, we did coordinated campaigning here. You were talking about handing out literature for the other candidates, and I, from the beginning, I had 2 interns that door knocked for me, and the 3 of us always carried as much literature as we had. So I was constantly asking other candidates for their literature, and we carried that and handed it out to people, or hung it on their door if they weren't home. So we were trying to be their voice in the community when we knew they couldn't physically knock every door, and we were trying to help them. And then the Boone County Democrats also printed up a flyer that was all the candidates in Boone County that you could vote for, and we carried that and we also mailed out those kinds of flyers as well. But it was we felt that we needed to utilize our resources, because our resources were pretty thin this year, and so I hope that was somewhat effective. And one other thing that I started doing when I very first announced, I started going to every city council meeting of every town in my district, which was a lot of them, little tiny, Luther and Fraser and Berkeley, population 27. They had not, none of these communities had a candidate come. And I said, I want to introduce myself. And I think if I'm asking to represent you, I should come and find out something about your community, what's going on here, who the leaders are, and let you find out something about me. But I had a lot of really good feedback from that.
And I think that is so important.
I think that was very successful, Penny. I live close to the little town of Berkeley, and I don't think there are probably more than 100 people that live in Berkeley. But
27.
27. I picked up your yard signs there after the election, and they were out. They had done I
had three yard signs in Berkeley. That pretty much blanketed the town.
So let's go maybe to the second question. What could have been done differently? What should have been done? What can we learn from this campaign that we can take forward to the next? Do you want to go first, Heather?
Sure. I think there is always room to learn. And one thing that I know is that, well, first of all, we still have a lot of data to wait on to be able to really know a lot of what happened. So, for example, we don't really know yet who entirely voted, right? That information has not been shared from the Secretary of State's office yet. So there's still a lot of kind of information that we're waiting on in order to be able to do a really big kind of deep dive on why people chose to vote the way that they did, who actually showed up to vote, all of those things. But that is something that I know in particular Iowa House Democrats are committed to working on. And we are also actively seeking out, just feedback from communities, people in communities across the state on what they were seeing and hearing on the ground. So I just wanted to put that out there as well. I think some of the challenges was that there was a lot of money spent against a lot of us, and that was really tough. And the fact that I won by 23 votes shows, just how tough going up against that kind of money machine was. So that's always going to be a challenge and something we need to continue to work on. I think one of our biggest challenges is just keeping local races local. When there is a really big push, a lot of times to make everything a national race, even when we're running, in just our own local communities. And I'm sure Penny would feel that way too. Like, you're seeking to represent a bunch of really small towns, right? And, and I'm, running to represent a pretty large suburb, but it's still trying to focus that. I was always trying to focus my message on building community in Ankeny. And I think that's something that, is a challenge. We always have to be working on that. And just straight up that we are deeply divided, right? And so that's always going to be a challenge.
Heather, there's a question from Anne for you in the comments. It says, what kind of support did you receive from the IDP in your campaign?
What kind of support did I receive? From the Truman Fund, I had support for, in addition to the money that I was raising, help with funds for doing some TV ads and mail and digital. And then having a campaign manager. Yeah.
Is the Truman Fund an arm of the IDP, or are they a separate entity?
They're an arm of it.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So just the Iowa House Democrats. And then the Senate Majority Fund does the state Senate races.
Anne says, another comment. When you say the Iowa House Democrats are deeply committed to a deep dive, what do you expect the role of IDP in this dive? That's a good question. I, as Women's Caucus leader, I sit on the State Central Committee, and we are, I'm sure, going to be talking about this in the near future. Our next meeting is December 17th. But do you want to try to do any prognostication, Heather, about what you think the role of IDP will be in that deep dive?
I'm honestly not sure, in part because I'm not on the State Central Committee. So I think you'd probably have a better idea than I do about the full party. I just know that based on my conversations with Jennifer Confirst, our Democratic leader, and what she has said publicly is how committed the Truman Fund is to doing the work we need to do to, be winning elections across the state and putting people over politics and really getting that message out there. Because frankly, the issues that we were focusing on as Iowa House Democrats, which was really around lowering costs, keeping public money in public schools, so no vouchers, reproductive freedom for all, and legalizing marijuana for Iowans over the age of 18, and the overall message of people over politics. Those issues are supported by a majority of Iowans. And so, those are the things that we were trying to focus on and will continue to focus on, frankly, with everything that we can do in the legislature, and making sure that we can kind of translate those values that the majority of Iowans agree with, but getting it across party lines is something that we need to continue to work on.
Penny, when you were door knocking, did you have a consistent theme that people expressed to you about their concerns and anxieties for the state of Iowa?
The biggest issue that I heard overall, time and time again, was education. People are very upset with the lack of funding we've had in education over the last decade or more, funding it below the rate of inflation. So many of them would tell me, I'm a teacher, and the teachers I talked to were literally hanging on by a thread. They were exhausted. They were emotional. They were asked to do more. They were teaching more classes than they had before. They had more students than they had. They had fewer resources. And if they were not a teacher, they had a teacher in their family, they had a neighbor or a friend who was a teacher, and everybody is very upset with the lack of support that education has gotten from the current administration.
Did that include talking about public dollars going to private schools?
I think I talked to one person in months of door knocking who thought that vouchers for private schools was a good idea. One.
Oh, one person.
And I didn't just knock Democrats. I knocked independents as well, all independents. And no, there was no support for it whatsoever.
Denise O'Brien, who is the vice chair of the Rural Caucus, has made a comment. She says the Truman Fund has not been effective all over Iowa. There was no help in Southwest Iowa at all. And I don't know. I just came off of a phone call or a Zoom call with the Rural Caucus, and they were making a list of all the things that we were talking about earlier that are not really divisive in terms of Democrats or Republicans, but they were talking about the reimbursement for Medicaid, since it's been privatized, to rural hospitals as well as nursing homes. They were talking about immigration. They were talking about education. They were talking about the pipeline and eminent domain. Do you, Heather, envision that those will be able to be brought forward, or will that be such a Republican-controlled House and Senate that they'll kibosh any of that legislation coming forward from the Democrats?
Well, I am by nature an optimistic person, so I'll just leave that there. But I've done this before. I've served in the legislature one term previously, and the Republicans control it, and the history of that is that they will not bring legislation to the floor unless they have the votes to pass it themselves. So it entirely depends on what kind of coalitions that we can build and get moving. But I think there are some, you're right, issues that do transcend party. The pipeline is one of them. I'm really hopeful that we can have movement on making sure that eminent domain cannot be used for private gain. That's incredibly important, and important to people all over the state. And then the Medicaid reimbursement rates, oh my goodness, absolutely. There has been some progress on that over the last couple of years, but it is not nearly enough. And what's nice, relatively speaking, is that because there has been some progress on it that has been bipartisan, I think that there is room to keep that going. So it's certainly something that I talk a lot about because that matters all across the state, right? Whether it is keeping rural critical access hospitals open, or just the fact that we have direct care workers in every community of this state that are barely making a living wage, if that. And the biggest way we actually help them is by raising wages, and we need to raise the Medicaid reimbursement rate to do that.
Yeah. I think I saw quite a few issues as a rural candidate. The main one for me was, how do you reach voters besides standing on their doorstep? Because we have a radio station, and a lot of people, especially the younger people, don't listen to a lot of radio. They stream music, whatever. They don't watch local TV, and I didn't have any money for TV ads at all. I saw we don't have a local newspaper to speak of here. There's an Ames paper that does publish some in Boone, but people complain there's nothing in it and it's not worth, and again, we've got a whole several generations of people that do not read newspapers, not just like my children, grandchildren. not a newspaper, not a radio station. So how do you reach these people? You can do mailers, but again, limited funds. And I had two things against me. One was the amount of money that was dumped into Phil Thompson's campaign. There were mailers coming out 2 and 3 times a week sometimes. And some of them didn't even mention Phil at all. He was barely on them. They took a picture of me from one of my social media and darkened it to, to make it look scary. And then printed falsehoods, the same ones that I believe I saw in your radio or a TV ad against you, Heather, with the same 4 bullet points that they used in every single flyer about me. The one that I support teaching critical race theory to children as young as 5, which is moronic because that's a college level course. And I've seen some bright 5-year-olds in my teaching career, but none of them that I said, I think you're ready for college, kid. But they knew which buttons to push. Their constituents in here, what they get is they get a very conservative radio station with conservative talk radio, and you know how toxic that can be, and they get Fox News, and that is what our rural people, that's all they have access to, because you can't they don't have high-speed internet, they can't stream TV, some don't have, there are communities without cable TV in these rural areas, and so there's a real desert of information, and how to reach those people is something we need to do some serious research and figure out a method. How are we going to even talk to them and tell them? And when I honestly, if the money just went out of politics and it was just people instead of all those big dollars pushing, because I got slammed really hard. They spent a lot of money to make sure that I did not get elected. For one thing, well, they obviously have a healthy respect and fear for me, or they would not be dumping that kind of funds in.
Oh, yeah, they probably thought they were going to lose the seat. One of the questions one of the comments from Mickey Carlson, who is listening, she says, what about billboards and big yard signs? Do they help? And maybe that's for rural areas particularly, because Heather, I think you had some TV ads, didn't you?
I did, but I would...
I don't know what's going on with our internet, with my internet. The lights are not going off and on at our house. It's just on my screen.
But I would say, and I'm sure Penny has a lot to say about billboards and yard signs, but I would say that they absolutely matter. And I don't know about so much billboards in an area like Ankeny, but yard signs for sure, for a couple of reasons. And I will say that, before I ever ran for office, I also worked on campaigns. And so I feel like I'm always approaching so many of these questions from the perspective of someone who's done the staff side of things and as a candidate. And I will say, once you become a candidate, then you have a fundamentally different feeling about yard signs and that they are the greatest thing in the world. But I will also say that they really do make a difference for a couple of reasons. One, especially in local races, they help build name ID. And that's incredibly important. They also are social proof that there are other people in your community that support the same candidate that you do. And it just helps to see it. It feels, as just a regular person in town, it helps to see that other people support the candidates you do. And then that might inspire you to also put out a yard sign as well and show your support, because you're seeing it happen for other people. It's also important to remember, that they are not necessarily votes, but getting that name ID built up, especially as a challenger, is incredibly important. And those are my thoughts on yard signs, but I would love to hear what Penny has to say about it.
Well, I agree entirely that the name recognition and the yard sign is the way to go. And if you've got the funds, a few of those larger signs and billboards are wonderful. What I saw in Boone County, we had 2 incumbent Democrats. A recorder who's been in that office for 24 years, been the recorder just for the one term, so that almost 4 years she's been the recorder, and one of our board of supervisors who's been there for 12 years. And they had overwhelming numbers of yard signs throughout the county and the big signs in the rural areas. And they were probably 10-1 yard signs over their opponents. And they both lost every bit as bad as I did, like 60-40.
Yeah. And I think that's true.
So it wasn't going to make a difference this year.
Yeah. So it's not even so much, because I completely take your point. It's not so much that it means that you will win, right, if you have more yard signs,
right,
or billboards or anything. But it is one of many tools in the toolbox, I guess,
right,
of a campaign is an important way to think about it.
And we honestly have to use every single thing that we have. I had I could have used 20 times as many volunteers as I had. Mostly, a lot of days, it was just me out there.
Yeah.
One of the comments that has come in from, I don't know if we call them listeners, a person that's with us, is she says, I have a 22-year-old and a 15-year-old. Reaching young people is about acting on the issues that matter to them. In Iowa, we have an opportunity right now with the pipelines, because it's also about climate, not just eminent domain. And then she thanks you, Heather, for bringing that up. But I think that is a really critical point, that if we want to engage our younger voters, we have to identify issues that resonate with them. Do you think go ahead.
Yeah, I too had the issues that I found with the younger voters was climate, but another one was legalizing marijuana, which we're the only state now that, I think Missouri passed it on their ballot, didn't they? So we are surrounded by states where it's legal recreational marijuana, not just medicinal. And we're losing millions, if not billions of dollars across the border that's leaving our state and supporting our neighboring states. Plus, we're still jailing people for these offenses, and that not only is that destructive for the lives of these people, but it's also it costs a whole lot of money to keep those people, to build prisons and to staff them and to maintain them, and the utilities, you name it. That's a lot of our money. Why don't we put the money into schools instead of prisons? And there's a lot better, but the kids really think that we're behind the times in so many ways. Young women were fired up about their reproductive rights, absolutely fired up about it. So in the demographic, people under 30, Democrats, I'm guessing Democrats won in that demographic.
Yeah, and
it'll be interesting that state, the Secretary of State, the breakouts. Before we go too much further, Anne and Denise are having almost a parallel conversation. Is about, if Iowans didn't believe that public dollars should go for private schools, and then why was the big red tsunami? And then Anne finally says, do you believe that Iowa Democrats have a common strategic vision that can lead us to victories? And if not, how do we get there? I think that's the $1 million question that I have been wrestling with, and I think other people in the state are too. How do we move forward as Democrats and democratic values? Heather, we'll let you try that one.
Sure. So it's a lot of stuff all at once. But I would say that, just first of all, recognizing what I said earlier, of that there is still a lot of data that we need to be able to do a really good analysis of everything that happened. this election. But that being said, it is very true that Democrats are not winning in areas that we previously won in, right? And so something clearly has to be done about that. And there are probably any number of different reasons why that might be happening. And I think so much of that can be, we can do more as a state party to focus on a message, but also I think we can do a lot more, I hope, on building up county parties and local community groups to help do more of that very local messaging and community building. Because, I mean, quite frankly, like Penny and I probably agree on most things, right?
Most
right.
likely.
I'm assuming we probably do.
I would think so.
Right. But we live in very different places, right? Like we both live in Iowa, but I represent a town that is a population of over 70,000, right? And it's just one town, right?
And my entire district would have half that, if that, maybe not even half of that.
So it's, and I mean, in my district is obviously half of Ankeny. So, but the town itself, is a big growing suburb, right? So having one message that is the exact same across everybody is not necessarily the right thing, but at the same time, having a common set of value statements. And yes, some we have, like I said, the people over politics piece for the Iowa House Democrats. Like, here are 4 core, policy issues that we as Iowa House Democrats would like to work on is, I think, important. But what I would also do is encourage the state central committee, to really think about what the role is of the state party and what you guys want to do moving forward, right? To kind of build that strategic vision for our state as Democrats.
One thing I would like to see is at the IDP at the state level, if I would like to see a what I call a quick strike team. So when one of our candidates is hit with one of these negative and false ads or something, I would like to be able to counter that quickly and forcefully. To I would like a messaging somehow from the top that they hit all of their messaging streams, like, this is bullshit. Pardon my French. And I would like to just come right out. And that's what I did when I was on the radio, my radio station. I said, I'd like to go through these points that the Republican Party printed about me and explain to you how each and every one of these is false, and why is it not illegal for them to put this out as fact when in fact there's not a fact there. So I think we need to work towards we have truth in advertising. Well, when you are campaigning, you are advertising for yourself, and I think we need a nationwide law on truth in political advertising, and you have to be able to back it up. If you don't have the the proof, you better not print it. I would love to see that. That would make a huge difference.
Mary, may I want to just go back to one of the questions that was already asked around, I think it was Kim that talked about reaching young people and acting on the issues that matter to them. I completely agree on that. And also you talked about that it was also about climate, not just about eminent domain, but both are important. Absolutely. And I think that climate change is something that I talked about a lot, but it is something that I think we have a real, not just an opportunity to talk about, but an obligation to talk about, not just as Iowans, but as Americans and living in this world together. And so one of the things that I talked about a lot that I would hope is something that might resonate across the state too, is the importance of building both an environmentally and economically sustainable future, and that these things are not mutually exclusive. And so I think that it's a focus both on like the climate piece of things, but also how, yes, that actually will boost our economy if we are focused on things like, exploring new like electric technologies, and other things that are expanding solar, expanding wind, all of that
Build
has
some sustainable, affordable housing, because the young people I talk to say, I don't think I'll ever be able to afford to buy a house.
Yes.
Because, they're building $500,000 houses, which is not feasible for somebody with, I did a lot. Part of Ames is in my district. So I knocked a lot of doors where there were in areas, apartment buildings, some trailer courts with a lot of college students. And I had, the climate issue was one that resonated with them. Yeah. I handed out my literature and was talking and had moved on and gone down several doors, hit the end of the hallway and was coming back. And one of the young woman threw open the door. Oh, good. I didn't miss you. She said, I just was reading through your literature and I jumped on your website. And she said, and I agree with everything you said. And she was so excited to see a candidate who echoed her concerns and interests. So if you can get their attention.
And I would add on to that too, that it's not just young people. It is literally like to convince somebody to get out and vote, who perhaps doesn't always vote, right? They need a really good reason, because it's not always, I think that's going to be, if they don't come out and vote for us, they're going to go out and vote for the Republican candidate. I think it's a choice between going out and voting for us or saying it's not worth it and not going to vote at all. Right. And I think that goes across age demographics. And I think there are a lot of folks who, understandably, for any number of different reasons, feel like voting will not make a difference for them personally, because they have yet to see the things that are impacting them the most in their day-to-day life changing. And so being able to try to really work on those issues, as Penny already said, housing, childcare, where can we focus on lowering costs that actually make a difference in someone's life? That's important. But showing up to have those conversations. I had a conversation with a woman at her door, where she had said, I can't, we rent this house. I have never missed a payment, but I also can't get approved for a mortgage. And so because of that, her family is not able to buy a house and build generational wealth. That is a challenge. That is something that we have to keep working on. So it's all of these pieces together.
And we had the question in the chat, and I do not have an answer for you. Whoever asked, if most Iowans agree with our positions, then why did Kim Reynolds get elected? If they do not support her, good question. And I don't have an answer for that, because we look at the money that she turns down, just, $30 million in childcare support. She turned it down because they'd have to put $3 million in. That seems like a wonderful investment and something that's desperately needed. When I mapped, I do the sex offender registry maps for our sheriff's office. I'm the GIS coordinator for Boone County. So maps and apps are my thing. And I map with a 2,000-foot buffer around every daycare center, childcare center, and school in the county. And when I mapped it 2 years ago, we had 52 childcare providers in Boone County. And when I mapped it this year, we had 26. So there's a good illustration for you just what a problem it is, and especially in some of these rural areas, and that's keeping people out of the workforce. Every business owner I know says, just give me an employee, just one. I want to, they're begging for employees, but if you cannot find childcare, you can't work. Or if you can't afford the childcare, you can't work.
I'm cognizant of the time, and this is going to be a big question, but I want to put it out there. It's from one of the participants. What role does the presidential caucus have, if any, in distracting the party establishment from focusing on winning elections in Iowa? Is this a concern to you as leaders / elected representatives? We're soon going to know in Iowa what the National Democratic Party is going to recommend. So what are your thoughts regarding the caucuses, and does it help or hurt and build our party? Penny, do you want to go first?
I happen to be a party chair, chair of the Boone County Democrats. So yeah, I have seen a big difference. Of course, COVID smacked our, especially Democrat volunteers down. The Republicans weren't so cautious, but our people stayed home. I'm not going to anybody's door. I'm not going out in public. We're not meeting. We're not gathering. So we lost a lot of momentum. But I think from what I have seen in my years, and I've got 8 years with the Boone County Democrats now that I've been hanging out with those guys, and the caucus years, it builds excitement and it gets people involved. It gets people step up and volunteer. Part of it is because we're calling them. We need somebody at every precinct, and we need to train them, and we need. But it's not just that we're contacting them, but that we have something concrete for them to do. We need you, and here's what we need you to do. And I think that's probably something that we can work on in our as we go forward, trying to recruit volunteers. Is come up with something that, and just a small ask. We don't want to ask for half their life. We just a small ask, something to get them to involved and motivated, and a success story where they will continue to spend time with us.
Heather, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. I mean, it's a big question. And there are things that are really wonderful about the caucuses and things that are also a challenge. The caucuses, I think, as Penny already said, I mean, they generate excitement in a way in our communities in a way that sometimes we do not get, right, in other years. So there is that. The caucuses also bring financial resources into the party to be able to pay for things like organizers that we really want to have all over the state. So there are really good reasons for it, for those sort of things. And obviously, I personally love going to caucuses because I think they're fun. But I think it's also important that we, as a party, are able to, walk and chew gum at the same time, right? And do two different things, right? That we can hopefully, be able to do things like the caucus, but also do a lot more work on getting individuals within our communities more excited and engaged in helping with other elections on the ballot in every other year, right? It cannot be a one thing or another. And certainly, yes, the National Democratic Party is going to make a decision on what's going to happen. And it'll also be interesting because it's in Iowa code that we have the first caucus. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, just because it's also in Iowa code.
It looks like we might have one more topic to bring up. Lynn has a comment. She says, in a previous discussion, was the gun legislation brought out Republicans in droves. We couldn't withstand that issue, and all those folks voted Republican. And I'll add my own trailer to her comment, is I don't think people ever comprehended the strict scrutiny and what that meant. But I'll let you two, our panelists tonight, talk about that too. Do you think that brought Republicans out?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right too on the strict scrutiny part. It's complicated language, and it requires it just requires a much longer conversation with
it was advertised as it's the Second Amendment. We want to make sure if they ever do something at the national level, we have those rights here. Well, it wasn't, but it's like you say, we have to talk so much to counter that little soundbite. So we're gonna have to get better at those sound bites, I think.
One of the people, and I think now we're getting a lot of comments, and that's good, but she's thanking you both for running. So I think we need to express that also and let all of our viewers appreciate that. And it's not a walk in the park. It takes lots of time and energy and money.
Like a pregnancy. It was
sometimes
9 months
of your own pocket.
Continuous 9 months of yeah.
Yep.
One other comment is that they're talking about IDP and claiming that the caucus brings in money. It is that actually spent on winning elections. This person, she's had several comments, and she's really wanting Democrats to win elections rather than just talk about policy. How, one of you was a winner and one of you didn't win. And I'm not going to say loser because I don't think that is a good description.
I don't think so either.
But should we as Democrats be talking more about winning rather than our values? That's a complex question. Let me hear your thoughts. Heather, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I mean, I think that all of this kind of goes hand in hand. I don't think that it is one or the other. That talking about our values and showing up and having conversations with people directly, not just, over the airwaves or in a mailer, meeting people where they're at is how we win people over. And I realize that is not possible in every single circumstance, right? It's not. There will be people who will always vote for Democrats, and there'll be people that always vote for Republicans. And then you've got a huge group of people who will go back and forth on a ballot, or will just choose not to show up to vote. But I believe really, really strongly in the power of persuasion and the importance of it, because I think that is just absolutely how we have to move forward as a country, is to be recognizing that our neighbors are actually our neighbors, and that we may not agree on everything. And that is not to say that we don't talk about the things that should still be talked about, but we have to find a way to actually understand a little bit about where they're coming from, and then try to figure out how we move forward together. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but I believe that we have to try.
Penny, do you want to have kind of the last word on this?
I agree. We do need to say what we stand for, although I can see the Republicans have been winning a lot without ever seeming to stand for anything. It was more what they're against. But the people in the United States as a whole, and there's plenty of people in Iowa that are so tired of the negativity, the vitriol and the attack ads, and they haven't quite realized that it wasn't us. It wasn't us. We were the polite, and maybe too polite sometimes. I would like to
too Iowa nice, maybe.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, I don't think that it's that. Well, first of all, yes, we absolutely have to win elections in order to be able to do the policy. So the one thing has to happen before we can do the other, obviously. But I think, I mean, based on so many of the conversations that I have with folks at the doors, is that it's not totally policy driven, right? But it is values driven, right? So when I introduced myself at the doors, I talked about why I was running, you know, the need to actually be willing to talk to each other in order to solve real problems. And then my overarching like values/policy statement was that my focus is on making sure that no matter where you live in the state, you have both economic security and economic opportunity. Because to me, life's about more than surviving, it's about thriving. And we need to make sure we have policies in place at the state level that actually help people flourish. Now, to me, that is both a value statement and a policy statement, because I can then explain basically every policy position I have under that overarching values statement. And so being able to do that, I think is important. But it also is, again, getting in front of people to be able to have that conversation. And what was really wonderful is that there were so many people that I talked to, again, across party lines, that actually pushed back on it a little bit and were like, well, what do you mean by that? You know, what do you mean by security versus opportunity, or one or the other? You know, and it actually then opened up into a broader conversation that is driven by the voter, right? That it is voter centered, important to them for us to then work with.
Yeah. And I often start the conversation with, what's important to you right now?
Yeah. Yep.
What issues are top of your mind, and then explained my position on their issue. Yeah. And they're like, well, I agree with you. That's what I think too.
We are almost out of time.
Mary, thank you so much.
There's one last
for all you do.
Comment from Mickey that she says, thank you both for running. And she's giving me thanks also for hosting these women's caucus sessions. This will be available if you have any friends or colleagues that would like to view it. It will be available tomorrow. I'll send out the site on how you obtain that. I'll let you know that we're going to have a joint meeting in December with the Rural Caucus. That will be December 15th. And we're going to, they meet from 7 until 8, and we meet from 8 until 9. So we're going to meet them halfway and say it will be 7:30. And Jennifer Confrist is going to join us. I had a commitment from her today that she will be talking with us about the upcoming legislative session. So thank you both very, very much. And I think Diana, she's kind of stays behind the scenes, but she makes all of this happen. So Diana, thank you. And she has sending me a note that it will be available tomorrow on the Boone County Democrats of Iowa Facebook and YouTube as a recorded version. So with that, we'll let you go. Good luck in the upcoming session, Heather. And remember, you have lots of colleagues and friends out there will be rooting for you and maybe even lobbying and seeing you during session.
I hope so. Please come. Yes.
Okay. Good night, ladies, and everyone that's participating. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.